Good afternoon. We'll go ahead and get started here. My name is David Ceccarelli. I work in the Division of Administrative Services here at the State Water Board, and we lead up the fee branch here at the Water Board. Before I go into some introductions here, for those in the room, I just want to go over some safety issues. If there is a fire drill, we're asked to go down the stairs and across the street to the park, and we'll wait further instructions after that. Restrooms are outside the door to the left and to the right. This meeting is being webcast, so if you do have a question, those that are in the room, please speak into a mic. I believe we have someone that will be walking a mic around. Those that are on the web, please, we'll hear them on the mic if they talk into the mic.
Or email.
Yeah, so those that are on the web, please go ahead and speak into your mic. We'll hear your questions. And also, you'll want to mute your phones so there's no kind of relay back and forth. If you also have questions on the web, you can also email them in. We have someone that's taking the emails. We'll go ahead and respond to those questions here into the room. I'll do introductions here. I'll let them do the introductions to the right of me.
Glenn Osterhage, Division of Administrative Services in our fee branch.
And it's not close. I'm Brianna St. Pierre. I'm with the Division of Water Quality. I oversee the ag program at the State Board.
And just kind of a quick overview here. An agenda went out. Going through the welcoming and the introductions right now. John Russell from the Division of Administrative Services, Deputy Director, is in the room. And two of our board members of this joined us, Tam Dodak and Dee Dee Doreen from the State Water Board have joined us, and they're also in the room. We're basically going to start with program. Brianna's going to go over some alternatives. She'll go through a PowerPoint presentation. After that, we'll open it up to open discussions, and then we'll talk about kind of upcoming stakeholder activities. So I'll go ahead and pass it on to Brianna here.
Yeah, so I'm going to jump in before Brianna here, just give a 2-minute overview of where we've been over the past couple of years looking at fees. Probably about 3 years ago, we started a process in the last few years. Most of it has been around, I'll call it the financial viewpoint of making sure we have the revenue to cover the expenditures for the program. We've made a couple of different efforts before. Program did one a number of years ago, a number of different options of how to set fees. The current one, obviously, is the per-acre fee. We've worked with various stakeholders. Some are in the room, some probably on the phone. Some probably couldn't make it today, where we kind of repackaged it a little bit based off of what, not the program viewpoint, but more the financial viewpoint of setting fees. Never really went anywhere with that. I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. I'm losing track of all the years now. We did ask the regulated community to try to go separate from the Water Board, come up with some proposals, some options. That one also didn't get any traction from the community. And then last year, we kind of tried to work hand in hand between the Water Board, again, more on the financial side, less the program side, and looking at different ways of going through that. We did have one proposal from Cal Rice that came through. A couple of the other fee payers at that time chose to say, let's just keep it as it is. It's a simplistic approach, may not be the preferred method. We also had the issue with the East San Joaquin order that was coming through. Had some comments that let's kind of see where that's going to take us before we start looking at it. Some of our comments we've had is it's still a growing program. A couple of our regions in the state do not have either an order or a waiver in place. Even the Central Valley, that's been in operation for probably 15 years now, still has a number of unregulated acres. They're trying to get enrolled into the program. So it's still a maturing program. So this year, at the direction of our board, we kind of handed it over to our program staff to take a look at a more programmatic view of what the activities are within the staff working with the coalitions and the farmers and the growers. So that's what Brianna's going to do here. It's more of a program view and less of the financial side.
Thanks, Glenn. So I'm going to just jump into some of the options that we've considered. Some of them are modifications from proposals that we've received from stakeholders, but we really want to present what we've been working on and some options that we've considered and what potential impacts and special considerations for each one of those options. So we've looked at really 5 different options for concepts. We haven't crunched the numbers with these yet, but we've developed these concepts that could potentially be evaluated for fees. And I want to start by also saying that if there are any other concepts that you want us to consider or evaluate, please let us know. We're always taking comments, and our contact information is going to be presented at the last slide. So one option that we've considered has to do with, we call it reduced reporting option. So this would be if, say, for example, 10% of growers in a coalition would need to submit management or work plans. This could be like surface water quality management plans or groundwater quality management plans. Another requirement in this could be of 10% growers with exceedances within that coalition, and also 10% of growers needing enforcement actions within that coalition. Some things to think about. This is a metric-based option. This has a potential to have a big discount to some with a minimal impact to growers who may not qualify for this. And there's a direct correlation to reduction in staff time. However, if there's a change in any of this over the years, then this would require staff reevaluate who is eligible every single year. And if that's the case, then this may result in uncertain or fluctuating fees to the entire program. You want to do questions now or as we go?
Get through them all and then.
Sure, let's do that. Thanks, Bruce. For those on the phone, the question was if we're doing questions throughout the presentation or if we're going to wait until the end, and I think we're going to wait until the end to see what is presented in entirety. Another option that we considered is just looking at those things that were exempted in the East San Joaquin Order. There's already a recognition in the East San Joaquin Order that certain groups don't need to submit reports, and we could build off of that and just exempt or provide a discount for those groups who are already identified by the State Water Board in the East San Joaquin Order, that there's a reduction there and potentially do some cost savings. This would be based on already established exemptions by the State Board, and it would have a correlation to reduction in staff time. Obviously, staff aren't spending the time to work on reviewing reports that aren't necessarily required. But the other thing to consider with this option is that the East San Joaquin was very specific on who is exempt, and so this doesn't open up a broad window for people who could qualify for that exemption. It'd be very limited in scope. Another thing that we were looking at is an activity matrix. This would include a spreadsheet really of activities that coalitions are doing, things that they could be doing above and beyond, looking at kind of a scaled factor. So for example, if we had 10 items and a coalition was doing, say, 3 of those, then they could qualify for 1 discount, and if they were doing 8, then they would have a lower fee. Some things to consider with this is many people could potentially qualify, but it would potentially result in uncertain fees. So if a coalition was doing 5 things one year and then they were doing 10 things the next year, then that would be a significant change in the fees from year to year to the rest of the program. Another thing that we would like to have you consider is a threat to water quality and complexity model. This is similar to what is already done for other programs like the land disposal program, our WDR program. It would be a one-time setup, but it would need to be very thoughtful in how it's initially set up. With the setup in other programs, there's potential for subjectivity. And so the considerations in this model is the threat to water quality and complexity would need to have really objective and specific measurements so that the issue of subjectivity could be minimized. The other thing that would like to consider with this option is there may be varying threats and complexities for growers within a coalition, and so there may be some challenges with trying to implement this for an entire coalition when some growers may be in an area that is a less of a threat to water quality than maybe others, or have practices that are less of a threat than others. And so that there's some issues with implementing this one on a coalition basis rather than on a site-by-site basis like it is in the other programs in which this is already done. Or the alternative is we do nothing. We leave it as the per acre fee. The benefit to this is it's steady and predictable rates. There shouldn't be a huge fluctuation from year to year based on different activities that the coalitions may be doing. But it doesn't take into account site-specific impacts and impacts to staff time. That's what we've been working on. I didn't want to take up too much of your time, but I really wanted to leave this for open discussion and questions. So if you have questions, I think we could do questions in the room first, and then we can go online. And please identify yourself.
Sure, thank you. Tim Johnson, California Rice. First, just note my appreciation for the work that you have spent coming up with these alternatives. I'm sure we'll be able to find one that works for most. I guess just from a process standpoint, we get through the end of the day today. What is staff looking for? Comment modifications? How do we sort of get to a decision point in the time frame that would be necessary to affect a change for this fee season?
Before I let Brianna jump in as far as what program's going to do, so on our timeline for the fees, obviously we go to the board in September. Our preference is to have something at least that we can discuss with stakeholders. We have a meeting in June based off the May revise. That's usually our target date to have the options that we can take out for final comment. We usually wrap things up in the July timeframe, so we have time to go through our management and our exec, brief the board members if they request that as well. So probably we got about 2 months worth of quality time that we can work through any iterations of these, but probably have something that we think is viable or we want to move forward with by early summertime would be my goal for the admin side. I'm not sure about the program side.
Yeah, at this point, we wanted to, again, share with the work that we've been doing and get your feedback on things that you may support or things that you would like to comment on or modify or are completely against. We want all your feedback on that so that we can take that and try and maybe narrow this down to some more options and crunch the numbers and see what that would actually look like.
Ultimately, will staff be bringing a recommendation to the board?
I would say, we'd work with program staff and see if we could come up with a consensus of there is something valuable that we can bring to the board. As Glenn said, we would try to drive something towards September if that is our direction. If we are not there, then it's more a less of an update of where we are in the program. I know some of these options, concepts at this time, I know there's a lot of stuff that needs to be flushed out. And if there's options that we move towards, we may be looking at that, perhaps I'm just looking at the threat and complexity option, where as we start maybe looking at that, it may come out that to implement that, we may need more staff time to do that, which basically if we add more staff time, it's going to mean more cost and the fees may go up. So is that an option at this point to raise fees? So I think there's a few things that we do need to discuss and kind of work through before we do decide if we get to a point where we're going to bring an option to the board. But I definitely would say that, we'll definitely work towards that. And if we don't get there, we're definitely going to be updating the board.
Right, to add to that, I want to emphasize that if there is consensus on moving an option forward or one of these concepts forward, but understand that it takes a lot of time to get into some of the details, like the threat to water quality complexity or something more elaborate like the matrix, we may push that off until the next year, depending on how much effort is needed to actually get the fine details done in that concept. So if it was easily implementable, then we can definitely push that forward for September. But if we agree on a concept, but we need more time to work out the details, then it may have to be pushed off until later.
Thank you.
Bruce Haderschelt, Northern California Water Association, on behalf of the Sac Valley Water Quality Coalition. A clarification and a question. When you, number 2, when you say ESJ exemptions, what you really mean is the State Board's precedential order of February 2018, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, just want to make sure. And then the question is, have you vetted these ideas with the Irrigated Lands State Roundtable, which is comprised of all the irrigated lands and program staff in the other regions?
We've discussed some of these concepts with them, but in this detail, not yet. But we have been in ongoing conversations with them often. Thank you. Are there any more questions in the room? Thank you.
Excuse me, David Corey with the West Side San Joaquin River Watershed Coalition. Can you refresh my recollection about where do these fees go? What programs do they fund?
So the primary amount of the revenue that's collected is to pay for staff costs, what we call a program costs. So me and David, we're the admin side, so we're not in program. Our water quality programs do have what we refer to as redirected programs. So there are programs within the water boards that don't have direct fee payers. The primary ones are the basin planning TMDL programs, enforcement, there's a beach monitoring, and a few smaller ones. So those are programs that the water board staff works on without direct fee payers. All programs within the water quality programs pay a portion of that. The other one is the monitoring, the swamp and gamma. That is the one program that the ag community does not contribute towards. So it's, doing the numbers, it's about 65% of your fee goes to direct program staff and the normal overhead associated with that type of activity, and about a third goes towards other programs within the water boards that have a subsidiary impact within that program.
Yeah, I was just going to add that as the Budget Act gets signed by the governor each year, it gives us an opportunity to, of course, look at the total cost to fund and operate the Ag Lands program. And based on that, and what the Water Code basically says is we need to generate sufficient revenue to support those costs. And those revenues go into what's known as the Waste Surcharge Permit Fund. And of course, that fund supports all of our water quality programs, along with those redirected costs that Glenn mentioned.
But roughly 65% of the fee is sort of staff costs that are regional board staff, I guess, or mainly regional board staff going to administer the program and sort of work with the coalitions.
Right.
Does that deal with both coalitions as well as individual?
Yes.
well?
Yeah. So
And
if you're
then-
not part of a coalition, and if Brianna wants to add on to this, then you would be subject to an individual WDR permit.
Right.
And so, yes, the regional boards would be working directly with that permit holder.
And then 35% of the cost would be sort of these other broad-based basin planning, enforcement, monitoring type stuff?
Correct. Although the monitoring it isn't part of this program, but the Team DL total daily maximum load in the basin planning programs. And if you've kind of been around the program, those programs were general fund up until fiscal year 11-12, so about 6-7 years ago. And then those programs reduced from general fund and supplanted with fee authority. So there was an increase in fees at that point.
And I just wanted to add, the final thing on our agenda was talking about next steps, and the next general stakeholder meeting is going to be on March 14th. And at that meeting, I'm sure Glenn is going to present very nice pie charts and graphs and tables that go into deeper discussion about where everything goes, because I've seen it at other meetings.
Yeah, so those, before Bruce takes over the mic in, so yeah, we have a series of 3 general fee stakeholder meetings every year, February, March, based off the January proposed budget. So we're doing it in March this year, as Brianna said, on the 14th of March. In June, we'll have another meeting based off the May revise, and then we usually target one in August when we have an adopted budget. So those are the ones where it's a very high level. We show, here's our budgeted expenditure for each of the programs within the WDPF. Here's our forecasted revenue for each of those programs, and then you always have a delta, and that's what we anticipate fees having to go up with. We'll carry over from last year. We did have the board deferred some of our fee increases. We had a reserve, so that deferral carries over to this year. So we already started in the hole to begin the year. But yeah, in a couple of weeks, we'll have those numbers out and we'll discuss anything specific to ag. But again, it's a bit the high level. It's not going to be, here's what each individual coalition or each individual fee payer's changes are. It's just going to be globally.
Any more questions in the room? Yep.
I want to build off of Tim Johnson's question earlier. One, I appreciate the regional board, state board members and the state board direction last year to have you come up with a process. We as I've shared with you and others will share with you, we tried to do it internally, and we understand what the outcome is or what the need is for in that proposal. Couple of questions. One, building off of Tim's comment, how do we get to September and have vetted this through your 9 regions? What's your schedule? Question 1.
Want me to answer them as they come up, or am I going to wait till the end?
I'm sorry?
Was that your only question, or did you have?
No, not my only question.
Okay. Well, I was asking if you wanted me to answer these as they come, or wait till the end.
Why don't you? Because
Okay.
I get obtuse and obscure, and I'll bury that question.
So the timeline for this, as Glenn mentioned, we've got more meetings coming up, but in the meantime, we need to hear from you on your comments, what you would like to see as a concept moving forward, and additional details you may want to put into it. So right now, we need to hear from you on your comments.
I was going to jump in on this one, Brianna. So as the fee on the admin side, what we're going to do is we're going to wait for a program to come back to us with either a preferred proposal or multiple ones. If they say, let's go ahead and discuss 2 or 3 of them in more detail. So we're going to wait on our end. If Brianna or program says these are the 1, 2, or 3 that we want to pursue going forward, then we'll jump in and start costing out
Understand.
what some of those issues are.
Sure, I'll be more direct. You've got 9 regions around the state. You need feedback from them. You don't need just feedback from the Central Valley. You need to have I'm hoping that you're thinking about an aggressive schedule for outreach related to them and feedback from them, so we don't get to September and have the state board have to play Solomon on this and try to make a determination. I think the direction was for them, direction from your board members was to begin this process quickly. I'm sure that some milestones are important so that we don't end up in July still waiting for feedback.
So we have a standing meeting with the regional boards, and that meeting is taking place in April. So we will get feedback from them at the latest the end of April. But we
Okay.
will be sharing these with them. And like I said, we've been having this conversation for quite some time. But our next meeting with the regional boards is in April.
So as part of the feedback you want, it includes not only what you've presented today, but in July of 2017, July 21st, I think, you presented 10 different options. And are those still, would you like comment on those options as well? Or have you eliminated those options from that original July 2017 matrix?
At this point, nothing's really off the table. If you want us to pursue some of those options that we didn't present here today, then please let us know. We narrowed it down to these concepts for this purpose so we can take progressive steps forward. But if you want us to take a step back and reconsider something that wasn't brought here today, please let us know. And for our timeline, we're taking comments always. We realize there may be some more comments from the March 14th meeting. And so, again, we're looking to present something to the regional boards at the end of April.
I expect not only if we're doing our job well here on the stakeholder side, would we provide maybe some individual comments, but perhaps even some broader comments that folks can coalesce behind. Just want to make sure that of the 5 proposals here, are there any that don't work particularly well for you? I would assume you haven't brought forward stuff you can't do. You've seen a lot of stakeholder proposals that I know were challenging, and again, I appreciate that you went back and looked at this, but is there any here that, you know, has been a particularly difficult program or a particularly difficult approach to implement, so that as we sort of make our individual and maybe even some group comments back to you, that, you know, we're not putting you in a direction that'll, you know, be more difficult than would otherwise be necessary?
We tried to present all of these with the special considerations built into them and just, you know, just lay it out there. These are things that we have to deal with, and there's potential impacts to the ag community and then potential impacts to us for having to actually implement it, whether it's on a short term, developing a matrix, or the threat to water quality and complexity, or whether it's on a long term, having to reevaluate something every year because of changes in the coalition. So there's special considerations for all of them, and that's why we presented it like this, so you can see what we're working with.
I was going to join in and say, I think they're all feasible. Some are be a little simpler to implement within a 1-year time frame. 1 year is by the next fee stakeholder meeting. We go to the board, or something that's going to take a year or 2 to flesh out a matrix, you know, the threat to water quality type components. It's going to take a while to define those properly, especially when you're talking about 9 diverse regions. So again, I think they're all feasible. It's just that they're not all feasible within 3 months.
Right. And kind of add on to Glenn, I also see, you know, there's definitely, you know, probably some challenges over the next few years just to kind of figure out who falls within what pot. I think most all these options kind of line up where you almost have some type of a tier fee. You know, you maybe have a low, medium, and type high. And, you know, several people may fall within that low, but then it also means with the zero-sum game, someone's going to fall within that high and kind of move around. And, you know, the first crack at it, you may not have everyone in the same pot, and then figuring it out over the next couple of years, it may take some time to then actually get everyone kind of in that proper pot, or those proper tiers, to be able to assess those fees properly and generate that correct revenue.
Before we take any more questions in the room, are there any questions via email or on the phone? Okay, none via email. Are there any questions on the phone?
This is Abby Taylor Silva with the Grower Shipper Association in Salinas. I hope, can we have a copy of the PowerPoint that you're referring to, as I'm currently unavailable to look online. But then, go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, we just sent it out about an hour ago. We will post it on our website. So, okay, it just got posted on our website as well. So it is available. If you don't have access to either one of those, let us know in an email. We'll send it to you directly.
Wonderful, thank you. But I guess I'll say I appreciate the work that's gone into this as well. I think that the one, we'll take this to our stakeholders. I think the one that is interesting is that which is looking at the different functions of a coalition and, identifying which ones are, what's being done by said coalition and therefore what the fee would be. I think that is, this is all moving toward a place that's a little bit more visible and consistent with what we'd asked for. So I just appreciate that and want to thank you for it.
Thank you.
And I do want to ask if anyone is on the phone, if you can email us, if you want to be part of our roll call. We didn't do a roll call. I'm not sure how many people are going to be on the phone, but if you want to be registered, get us on our list, go ahead and send us an email and we'll record you.
There's more questions in the room?
Thanks, Bruce, again. I want to understand, under the reduced reporting, one of the special considerations is requires reevaluation of fees each year on site-specific basis. And I'm kind of correlating that to water quality management plans, which have 3-year life cycles. So and also thank you for this opportunity, because when we get to March 14th, I recognize that irrigated lands is one of 7 or 8 programs that's in the waste discharge permit fund, and landfills or stormwater may have some in-depth, some questions related to theirs. So appreciate the opportunity to have an airing of the grievances just for irrigated lands today. Nobody laughed at that. Okay, all right. But in all seriousness, I'm just not sure why a reevaluation of the fees on an annual basis. Maybe I'm being Central Valley centric here and not thinking more broadly to other areas. And then related to that, does this mean that those areas that don't have management plans would have a different fee?
To answer the first part of that, the way that this concept was drafted is it would need to meet all 3 of those. So if there were more than 10% of the growers with exceedances or needing enforcement actions, then if there were, say, 10% that didn't meet the management plans, then it would kick them out of that discount or into a different tier. Again, there's still concepts moving forward, but these are all really good questions to consider when pushing some of these forward to get into the bigger details. Did that fully answer the question?
The second part of the question is, what happens if an area, Del Norte County, doesn't have management plans? They wouldn't qualify for this.
Well, that's where it gets a little bit tricky with certain areas meeting an area for a discount, but other ones don't. And then how would that fee apply for a greater coalition? I think I mentioned that with one of the other options, but that's something else to consider with the details of pushing these concepts forward. I think we had a couple more questions in the room over here.
Hi, I'm Sarah Lopez with Central Coast Water Quality Preservation, Inc. I have 2 questions, and they're not related to each other, so I can either do them one right after the other or give someone else a turn and then come back. So my first question is on enforcement. When a grower fails to enroll or pay for a third-party group or a coalition or something to qualify them for Tier 1, currently Tier 1 state fee payment status, and so they're billed at the Tier 3 rate, and then that grower goes on to appeal and receive a tier reduction contingent on their going on to pay their way into the coalition or third party. Whose job is it to enforce that after they've been granted the state fee reduction, contingent on going on to interact with the coalition or third party, whose job is it to enforce that they actually do go on to do that?
So our Central Coast model is a little different than our other regions, as you know. First, it's nice to see you. I know I've talked to you on the phone a few times.
Nice to meet you.
So it's a little trickier one that we have to kind of figure it out. I don't know if we have anyone from Region 3 on the phone call today. They're the ones who would manage the program, would be best suited to answer that question. I can't answer that one right now. But you guys have a different model, and we'd have to figure out how this applies, because you do have growers that go in and out of your group, where the other regions, they're either in a group or they're not in a group, and they don't fluctuate back and forth. So that's a little different nuance that we have to look at.
But there's no one in Tier 3 from other regions?
I think there's 2 or 3 across the state right now that pay individual fees.
Okay, so this is probably a Central Coast issue?
Yes.
Okay, follow up. I'll follow up another time. And then the second question was around the concept of reduced reporting or reduced fees, and there would be a correlation to a reduction in staff time. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that concept. How do you gauge staff time and reductions in staff time, kind of across the years?
So the idea would be if someone didn't have to submit a particular plan or a particular report, then obviously the staff wouldn't then have to review that report or that plan. And so we were looking at potentially giving a discount in fees based on someone not having to submit those reports and therefore the staff not having to then go through the exercise of reviewing those. Does that make sense?
And that's something that's on a, is it on an individual operation basis? I'm guessing this is a Central Valley thing. Individual operations or coalitions submit these management/work plans?
At this point, I think it's a requirement for the coalitions to submit on behalf of the growers, but the requirement, the concept would be if any grower wouldn't have to submit it, then, and if it was an individual WDR, then they could potentially also qualify for a discount. But again, it's still concept phase. We're still trying to flesh out how that would actually work.
Okay, and is it any watershed potentially that's on the 303D list needs a management plan, is that
Not sure.
eventually?
I don't know.
That'd be my guess. I mean, we seem to work pretty hard to get additional watersheds onto that 303D list for more and more constituents, so, and the math is, what's that?
Gotta get your mic.
We're going to get you a microphone. And I apologize, I don't know that off the top of my head.
Mike Wakeman with San Joaquin County Delta Water Quality Coalition. We're not based on whether we have to do management plans based on 303D listings. It's based on exceedances and groundwater assessment reports and those type of things like that. So it's not based solely on that.
Okay, thanks for that information. I guess I just wanted, to express a concern about this concept. If, and again, this might be Central Coast centric thinking here, but if the criteria that trigger management or work plans are things that growers don't have control over in the short term, like, for example, groundwater quality or certain surface water issues, I could see that being a problem, trying to link up fees to that. And then I guess just the follow-up question again, so the idea of this, the reduction in staff time is because fewer management plans fewer management plans being submitted, means that water board staff have less work to do reviewing management plans?
Right, so their focus would be directed elsewhere. They could be doing more inspections or other report reviews or whatever.
Okay.
We're trying to correlate impact to staff based on workload. And so if someone is having to submit less reports, then we want to, in this concept, potentially give a discount for that reduced reporting requirement.
Okay. I think I'm with you, and I certainly understand why it's attractive to try to incentivize better water quality with lower fees, so that in general makes sense to me. The idea of trying to tie it to staff time seems like, I guess I would request that if you were going to do that, there be some sort of transparent metric for how you quantify staff time, because if they're just shifting their time away from reviewing management plans and into some other, administrative task, I mean, what you're really looking for is fewer water board positions needed to administer the ILRP program. That's what makes the cost of this program go down, right? So I guess I'm kind of curious about how that concept would figure into this.
I think it's ultimately, we are trying to incentivize the good behavior that would ultimately reduce the impact to staff time, but really the bigger picture is better water quality, right? So I think that's the tie-in for that concept.
Okay.
And say ultimately, it's your fee is paying for staff time, whether or not it's direct program or the redirected programs. So theoretically, if there's less requirements for state or regional board staff, so if the coalition is doing work on behalf of state board or regional board staff, there should be less staff time to charge. So yeah, you're right. If we're just going to move it from activity A to activity B, we're not changing our costs. But if the coalition or the approved group takes on activities that reduces the workload for the water boards, then yes, you should pay a little lower fee versus a group or coalition that does less and requires more staff time to administer those growers.
Okay, because last time I checked, regional board staff didn't bill by the hour. They
Charge all their time. How much time is globally spent within the entire program.
Okay.
Right, but those efforts could then be directed towards groups or individual growers who have higher exceedances or need more assistance with their management plans or practices
Okay,
to
so
improve
we're
water
not,
quality.
okay, so we're not really talking about overall ILRP program costs going down. Like the water board staff are always going to be there doing something on ag water quality. We're just trying to incentivize improved water quality.
Who's paying
Yes.
what portion of the pie?
Got it. Thank you.
It raised the question is whether we could voluntarily develop the TMDLs and get a price reduction, but I'm not sure if that'll work. When I look at these particular proposals, it seems like the reduced reporting requirement is really really based on the concept of threat and complexity. It is sort of a surrogate for that. And when I look at this particular proposal, I don't understand how it works. I mean, I'm not quite sure the nexus between percent of growers. Do you really mean growers? Do you mean acres? There's a whole lot within this that I don't understand. And it seems like to the extent it makes some sense, it really is getting down to something more akin to threat and complexity. And so I'm not sure whether this is any different from that or not. And so I'm just because of the uncertainty of what this means and how these particular criteria really get to that concept, I'm not sure that I can support it. I mean, maybe if I understood it better, I could. The east side exemptions, at least I think I can understand those. I'd have to go back and revisit the order, but at least I think I could figure out what you're talking about there. And so maybe that has some merit to pursue. And these are just my haven't looked at these for 5 minutes. The coalition activity matrix, again, that's similar to the first one. I don't really understand what that means. And you're saying the more work that a coalition is doing, the less they'd pay. I'm not sure that really relates to burden on or reduce burden on irrigated land staff or not. But again, I think that have to be fleshed out significantly to understand it. What's that? Value added. Yeah, I mean, coalitions themselves certainly reduce costs. So if that's the concept of just having coalitions reduces cost, yeah, I guess it could. But I don't really quite understand it. Threat and complexity to water quality, I mean, that, again, I think as you'd said in your initial presentation, I see some value and potential in that, but it's going to take some time to figure out what that means. And I guess we don't have to talk a whole lot about the no change. We understand what that is. In looking at this, I'm assuming that the savings that you'd get in any of this would be related to that 65% staff time and not the 35% that's just sort of really redirecting a general fund expense to fee payers. I mean, those are broad-based sort of benefits to everyone, have nothing to do with what's going on within the irrigated lands program. They're just flatly a tax on the dischargers to pay for a program. So redirected. So I'm not sure whether you're talking about reducing those or whether you partition these out or how, whether you see a distinction in those two types of fees.
Yeah, I think that the
I
conversation
threw a lot
here,
out there, but.
yeah, isn't about reducing the actual cost. I think this is what Sarah is getting to is, are we going to be reducing the actual charges that this program has statewide? This is about redistributing who pays the fees within the program. So it's harder in this program because I deal with all other 8 programs in the water quality. There's 20 to 25 coalitions. So if you make a change to one, you have very few other fee payers, which is the coalition, to offset those changes. Versus if you charge 5,000 industrial stormwater facilities, you change 1 or 2 of those, it's just a blip. You don't even notice that 2 of them went away. So it's just the scale of this program is tougher. Because you guys have the interface, other than with you guys and some of the individuals, you guys have the interface with those growers. I only interface the 20 or 25 bills that go out. But it's about redistributing who pays what portion of that. And is it the program's trying to figure out, is it a certain amount of activity going towards certain amount of work? And I have to spend more time on this group over here, so let's charge them more. That's what we're trying to figure out. And it's not an easy one, because even within a group, rice may be the exception here, is your growers are all diverse. So each one of these, if you're going to change and apply it to maybe 10% of your growers, what do you do with the other 90%? And then I'm not programmed. I know you have different watersheds, have different issues. So what's the impact of the watershed versus the actual activities of the growers?
Right, and I just want to add on to that I understand that there's some overlap with these, and absolutely we could kind of merge all of these together and come up with some new concept, and I'm not opposed to that at all, because I do see that there's potential for one to feed the other, and they're similar, but we again wanted to kind of just present concepts. They're not fully detailed yet. We wanted to see if maybe we were on the right track, or you want us to consider something totally different, or merge a whole bunch of these together and come up with something else, or take these concepts and merge them into, say, the matrix, or as our objectives for our threat to water quality and complexity option. We wanted to see what you thought about any of these concepts, and I do see room for overlap.
I got to maybe follow up on what David was saying, especially on number 1. I was trying to figure out, when you're talking about 10% of the growers are, and then you just mentioned difference within each coalition, are you looking at it on a watershed basis, or you're looking at, because I can see with the Delta, we have the Delta proper, which, the groundwater management is non-existent because we're trying to get water off the islands, versus my up guys over Escalon in that area, where they got groundwater issues and maybe not as much surface water issues. So there's a complexity there that I'm still vague on how, like, number 1 will work. And even if you move to number 4, it's a little vague there too, trying to figure out how within the coalition we're going to be able to tease this out, I guess, when you start doing some of these things. For us, I could say the proper area, the Delta, based on our groundwater assessment report or whatever that is, they don't get these fees, but then the other guys get these fees. So I guess that really needs to be clarified a little bit better.
We agree, and devil's in the details, and not disagreeing with anything you just said.
Response to David's comment, as one of the folks who've been pressing for the longest for some differential in fee, and the ability to move forward in that regard. Dave, is never my intent or Rice's intent to allocate anything other than the fees that are associated with the actual program implementation itself, the sort of general fees, the, stuff you got to pay for to just have a good general regulation. It's always sort of been off the table. Yeah, we need to pay an equitable share for that. So at least from my perspective, that's been our intent. Maybe if I could, Brianna, since your name is up there on the questions and comments, when would you like comments to you on any of these or new potential proposals for you to look at?
Can you get me comments by tax day?
By what day?
Tax day. April 15th sounds
Oh,
like a
you're
good
killing me
round
here.
number.
Now you reminded me of two bad things. Okay, April 15th. Got it. Okay.
If farmers have to pay their taxes March 1st, though.
Yeah, right. What about my quarterly property taxes?
I want to manage your program.
Roundtable?
It's April 24th. Sorry, the question was when exactly my meeting with the regional board is scheduled, and I believe it's April 24th. But if I got your comments before then I could present those as part of the package to the regional boards.
I mean, I think a month, I think Rice could provide you some substantive comments within a month. Yeah. We're saying March 30th would be the objective. Okay. April 1st. You guys are killing me here.
Someone's smart enough to look at a calendar. So the 30th is a Saturday, so we'll make it the 29th.
Brianna? So, thanks, I've got one too. I'll lean in. So in Region 1, that could work in Region 1, right? In North Coast?
Which
Because
are
you could have
looking at
areas of Region 1 that have less than 10% of the growers who have management plans or exceedances or need enforcement actions, right? Is that what you were thinking? Region 1 Region 1 goes up the coast, wraps around, includes the potato farmers in Modoc County, and then,
That concept was more on a coalition basis,
okay,
not necessarily on a region-wide basis.
okay, thanks for that clarification.
Anyone on the conference call have any questions?
Hearing none, I believe there's one question in the room.
Thanks, Sarah Lopez, Central Coast Water Quality Preservation Inc. again. I just also, I don't necessarily need a response to this, but if we're wrapping up, also just wanted to kind of say for the record that I appreciate the outreach and the presentation and the dialogue. Sincerely appreciate that. So just for the record, I don't think that there's enough detail or information presented here for Central Coast stakeholders to fully comment at this time, to fully assess what sort of what's potentially coming down the pike and generate meaningful comments. And so my understanding is that there's going to be more details provided in a March meeting.
Okay, so the March meeting will be the detail for this. That'll be up to Brianna. I think getting feedback for that. So for my March meeting, it's more of a general overview of fees, looking at the expenditures and revenues and projecting. I can let you guys know now that for the ag, you're looking at a 11 to 13% fee increase for next year. That's where the numbers we're scrubbing through those, but that's gonna be more of a high level, just looking at fees for next year versus the methodology of who's paying what. It's gonna take a little while, I think, for some of those. Again, some of these might be a little easier to get through, like the East San Joaquin's a simple one because we already know who's already exempted from that one. But some of the other ones, it's gonna take a little bit of back and forth between stakeholders, regional board, state board. That collaboration has to be worked on.
Right, and again, I understand that there aren't a whole lot of details at this point to comment on, but we wanted to present concepts, so if you wanted to really push forward with one, or I want to see more details on these 2 or 3, then that's really what we wanted your initial feedback on, but if you have more feedback, then that's great as well. And we understand that Preservation Inc. has a different model. We really had that in mind specifically with our matrix option as well as our threat to water quality and complexity models. We realized that some of these others could apply to you, but we also understand that Region 3 is going through the process of incorporating some of those additional requirements that Preservation Inc. is going to be taking on, and so we were viewing that as fitting into some of these options as well.
Okay.
Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you. And so, yeah, and also recognizing that the timeline for, this year's fee cycle and then the Central Coast Ag Order renegotiation are not entirely on the same timeline. And so I totally appreciate all the timeline constraints. I just wanted to go ahead and state that for the record, that at this point in time, the Central Coast doesn't have sufficient details or clarity on the concepts to fully comment on this. Thanks.
This may be a little too detail-oriented, but Laura Brown, California Strawberry Commission, how are you going to communicate with, perhaps especially on the Central Coast, the Regional Water Board staff and the programs, and evaluate how their time is spent on the various projects and programs to be able to kind of equitably evaluate how much time they're spending working on ILRP programs versus other programs that they have in the region?
Apparently have to keep pushing my button twice. We've already been having those conversations, and we're kind of building that into some of these concepts. They are keeping track of some of their time loosely on how much they spend. If a particular staff person is working on, say, the ILRP program plus another program, we do know what their proportion of their time is. But as far as some of those details, we're working with them to see how some of this would fit with them as well. And so we've already started those conversations so we can build those into these matrices if we had to extend them out and push forward with that concept. I don't have a more detailed answer because it's still in process.
I don't know if you could give a little bit more detail on option 3, the coalition activity matrix. I'm not sure I really grasp that. Is there any more detail you can give me than what, or just say it again, I might just not remember, I don't know.
For that option, we were really looking at, say, for example, a group performed groundwater monitoring plus education and outreach plus their own collection of fees. And I'm just going to leave them at those 3 for this example. If a coalition did one of those, then they would be in one tier. If they did 2 of those, then they could be in a separate tier. And if they did all 3, then they could qualify for the lowest tier. And that was kind of the concept with that. We're still trying to work with the regions on everything that the coalitions are actually doing, and then looking at other activities that we could add to that to really incentivize additional behavior, something that could add additional value to the program that isn't necessarily written into their order, but they might be doing above and beyond. And so that's where the matrix can explode, and we're trying to be encompassing, but make sure that it's a manageable size. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the first 3 things you said, at least within the Central Valley Coalition, I think we're all doing all 3 of those things. So maybe it makes more sense in a statewide context. I'm curious about those extra things that you're considering what those would be, but
Do you have
I have a
options?
better idea of what you're
Okay.
talking about.
We're taking suggestions.
One thing I wanted to bring up is when, or I was going to say if, but when we want to reconvene this type of meeting to go over. Brianna's already said they were going to meet with the regional board staff at the end of April. So I'm top of my head thinking maybe late May might be the best time. I don't know if it's going to give you enough time to bring something out of those discussions. You're nodding your head. Okay. So unless anyone objects, we'll try to find a date in late May for our next outread from what Brianna and program is going to do after the regional board conversations. Timing wise, if something comes out of that, that's a short term, quick hit, we can look to move forward as we go to our board in September. Obviously, if the proposal comes out, if they have one, that's one of the options that's going to take a little longer to vet out and go through. Then it's going to take more than just this 1 year. So I think the question that Tim had is what's the timeline? It's going to depend on what program comes out of all these discussions. I think Bruce, you had a question?
Comment and a question. Well, this feels like the same schedule from last year, so that's the comment. The question is, last year in September, the state board had two fees initially to look at. One was the adjustment from 87 cents to 95 cents. And then the other one was I believe it was a Central Coast specific fee of twice that. Is that still, what is the status of that?
You're saying the status as far as what the proposal was for Region 3?
Yeah, could you?
Right
could
now,
you, because I won't be able to articulate it like you guys conceived it, so could you refresh everybody's memory what that was? And
yeah, in brief, without having my notes in front of me, what that was looking at the fact that Region 3 does have more staffing devoted to that region on a very high level per acre basis by staffing. So we had made a proposal to increase the fees that those growers pay. That was removed. It was recommended we don't go forward with that option. Right now, I have not heard of any intent to revive that at all. Right now, we're looking at, obviously, keep the per acre fee, or if program comes back to us, look at some other options to move forward with. So right now, I don't think anything for Region 3 will come out specific to them unless there's a coalition activity type matrix where we're looking at what types of activities that group is doing versus what other groups are doing across the state.
But one of the options that you presented today, or an option that's on your other matrix, could result in a higher per acre fee based upon staff time required. Is that correct?
Well, first of all, you got to take the cost is going to go up because we know we deferred some from last year. So that aside, if we had the same costs, if one group is going to pay less, that means someone else is going to pay more. So yeah, if we go with one of these other options currently presented today, or some other iteration of an option, it's going to change the balance of who pays what fees, because it's zero-sum game. It's not changing.
All right, I'm breaking my promise to myself. You said last year's fee was for the Central Coast was based on the staffing time it took to manage that. Did you not?
It was looking at the number of staff that was allocated to that region based off of the number of acres that was in that program for that region.
Sure, okay, I understand.
I'm seeing no more questions in the room. There aren't any emailed. Are there any more questions on the phone before we wrap up?
I think the go forward is comments are going to be due to Brianna by March 29th. The regional board roundtable for the ag program is going to be on April 24th. And we'll look to a date in late May for our next statewide meeting to discuss any of the output that they may have at that time. And then David wanted me to remind you, again, our general fee stakeholder meeting based off the January proposed budget is next month on the 14th. Okay, thank you.
Thank you all for attending.